In this video, you will see a shortened version of a debate for just 2 students. You have probably already seen different formats of debate for different number of students, for different length, etc., etc. What is important, and also the purpose of this video, is that you can actually be flexible in using debate as a teaching tool. In this example, we are using just 2 students to have a debate, and we are using shorter speeches. Therefore, as you're going to see, the speeches are going to be 4 minutes long, and each student is going to have 2 speeches. This means that in theory, this debate will be just 16 minutes long, and it will include just 2 students. You could just as well have 2 students versus two students speak for 4 minutes, and you could within the bounds of reason, you could change this to best fit your needs in your classroom, meaning that you could add more speakers, add shorter speeches, longer speeches. We still believe that the longer formats and the official formats that we use represent the best compromises between length and accessibility. However, we believe that if circumstances call for a different approach, it is still going to be very beneficial for your students and for your classroom if you engage in that.
Okay, starting. Okay, thank you. We are now starting the debate. The first speaker for the affirmation, whenever you are ready, you can start.
Alright, so my case is divided into 2 arguments that I'll be presenting in my first speech. The first one is about the duty to society that people hold, and the second one is about the utility that this specific policy brings towards a society and why it should be valued over individuals' liberties. But before that, let's just talk about what civil conscription is so that everybody understands what it is. We believe that civil conscription is defined in a way that oftentimes is the obligatory means of contributing back to the society. Usually it occurs when a person is 18 as a means of you just go to work, the state gives you a job and you just work there. It is usually unpaid, and usually the alternative is either nothing or military conscription, which is far worse. For example, in Austria, you have the option of going to the military or to have civil conscription, and is thus used as a healthy alternative in that means. That being said, how it looks like is usually a couple of months of just work that you do for the society. Let's talk about the arguments. The first argument is about the duty to the society that individuals pose. We believe that at the point at which society gives you the ability to grow up in a pretty leisurous way, and the point at which you are able to go to school, you have the ability to just feel safe in a society, at the point at which there is a law system in place, at the point at which you're able to trust one another, since people are presumed to be doing legal things. I think this is a huge contribution to the individual's life, and thus we should have some grounds of defending that and giving back to the society. We cannot give back in other ways, because this is an absolute thing that you have to give back, because the state gives me absolutely everything. It gives me a sense of self, it gives me a sense of everything. It cannot simply contribute it by smaller paychecks in the form of taxes and other things like that. Second argument then about the idea of how utility brings forward in our society, and how that should trample individual freedoms. We claim that at the point at which individual freedoms only presuppose the ability for a society to function already, we should prioritize the ability for this society to function. At the point at which the government correctly identifies that you need to some degree civil conscription, we believe that it is justified for the government to do so insofar as it enables individual freedoms in further ways. For example, after a war or after a conflict, you have a lot of bad things happening to that society, about you don't have let's say roads and infrastructure, and if you don't have that, you don't have the money or ability to just raise taxes, since everybody is poor. This was just literally a war right now. You don't have any other ability to do this. Civil conscription is probably the best way, and this is the only way that other individuals can afterwards have a leisurely society like a nice life afterwards, and the only way that individuals' freedoms can manifest afterwards. However, even in scenarios in which utility is not presupposed by a crisis, but rather other things, we believe that it is more important to value this utility over other things. Simply because this utility is just like an objective measure, and the point at which these individuals feel like, for example, if you have a new road, for example, if you have a lot of community service that is happening in your like everyday lives, like the elderly are being helped, the children are being taught, like every single point at which there's a lack and shortage of the government for not to be able to provide to these individuals, and that is able to be fulfilled, this utility is much greater than individuals' freedom to just do whatever you want for that couple of months. And I think this is like extremely important to weigh up against these things. The most important way in this like utility principle is further than that the people that most need these helps are the people that we can help with like this limiting of freedom of like a couple of 18-year-olds, maybe 20-year-olds, simply because the comparison here is that you're like a young person that has the ability to do whatever you want. You now like become like, you go into civil conscription and your freedom is limited to some degree. However, with the contribution that you do to the society, a lot of elderly people are able to, let's say, live longer lives, like happier lives. A lot of children are able to like actually get educated in these scenarios. A lot of people are able to provide like the roads and things like that. And your society is much better as we have a greater ability and greater marginalized communities in our set of house.
Thank you. I thank the speaker for the fine speech. And now I call on the speaker of the opposition for the first speech.
Hi, so my case will be structured in a bit of a different way. Firstly, I'll negate the two arguments he presented, and then I'll present my first argument, and I'll do a similar thing in my second speech. So firstly, I'll negate his first argument, which is about the duty to society. He said that society gives you a good place to live. It's a huge contribution that it gives to your life, and that there is no other way to give it back. I simply disagree, because there are taxes, and if the taxes do not give enough back, you could simply raise them, and society could contribute even more to your life. I'll extend further in my first argument. And the second thing I'd like to talk about is the utility. He said that it enables individual freedoms in other ways. Yes, but that only works in a crisis situation. As he said, if a country is poor because, like, for example, of a war, they cannot raise taxes. I agree with that, but that only works for a crisis situation, because if we have a situation like, for example, here, there's maybe no shortage of laborers, and this would simply take away the freedom of the people. And then he talked about community service, and here's two things. If they cannot choose the work, in the case that there's a shortage of workplaces and jobs and laborers, it's bad for them, because there's a possibility you cannot do the work. For example, someone is not suited for physical labor, and that's the only workplace where there is a shortage, so that could harm them, and that's simply not okay, because you cannot harm individuals for the good of community. So now I'll be moving on to my argument, which I'll also extend a bit of the negation. I'll talk about how much do we actually owe to society. First thing that we have to establish is that we did not give consent to be born into a society. This is also the example of whether we owe our parents everything, or whether we owe them nothing, because they chose to give birth to us, and we did not choose to be born. And then the second thing we have to talk about is that what society actually gives to us. Because this is what a lot of what he talked about, that society gives us a good place to live, and it's a huge contribution to us. But if we look into a very capitalist country, for example, the USA, it does not give its people much. There is no free healthcare, there's no free school, there's no housing. So the individuals in that country do not actually have to give much back to their country. And if we talk about a socialist country, where there is housing and free healthcare and free schooling, you already pay for that back with your taxes. And if you don't pay enough back, just raise the taxes, because it's easier, more fair, there's less control from the government, there's no actual free labor, as there is in his case. So we don't actually owe more than we are paying in general, and no matter what perimeters we change, there's no actual point in having civil conscription. So I'm ending my speech with that. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the final speech. And now, to close the affirmative side, once again, here.
All right, my speech is going to be structured purely on negation, but first I'm going to talk about it's going to be just negation. Firstly, let's just talk about the characterizations of a couple of things. Firstly, let's talk about the characterizations of the state. I think that the state generally is a very smart actor. Why is this important? I think this is important because at the point at which it is mischaracterized that the state is going to force individuals into labor that they're not very responsible at or not very suitable for, this is like not very clear. The state is capable of understanding that some 18-year-olds are probably not going to be able to do hard labor on like the jobs. They're capable of understanding these things. They're more likely to do organizational labor. In the event that, however, it is needed that you need like hard labor, we prefer that in a crisis situation over you not having literal roads and thus the inability to restart your economy after said crisis situation. So most of the cases, they're not going to do extremely hard things. In specific cases, the state is smart, they're going to do good choices. The second thing, let's just talk about to what extent this duty is, because I think this is the most important question of this debate. We say that you have the absolute duty towards the state purely because it provides you with literally everything that you have. We've already hinted at this for our argument and it wasn't clearly responded to. I think that generally the reason why it is absolute in what you owe back to the state is a couple of reasons. One, it is because they give you the ability to have these things in the first place, right? You get the school, you get jobs, you have every single thing like social services, like they say. However, even in this scenario in which you have a highly capitalist country, I think that they provide you with a lot of things that otherwise they wouldn't, you would not have access to. In a natural state of environments, per se, and that's talked about contractualist theories like Hobbes and things like that, you don't have anything, right? You don't have the ability to even trust the other individual at the point at which you don't have a collective idea of what is just and what is right. That is to say, if I were to run into random individuals in like a jungle with no society, I would not be able to trust that individual and them not killing me. And thus I would not have the ability to create anything outside of myself. And thus everything that I create outside of it, everything that I care about, my family, like the literal, like the house that I live in, everything is based upon other people already having and creating these rules so that we are able to trust each other, so that we have a police force that is able to like instill this idea that we have these things already. It is because of that we don't only owe the taxes that you're able to do, but the absolute freedom, the state has absolute freedom of doing whatever it wants with the people inside of its society, and thus like civil conscription is absolutely possible. It cannot be fulfilled only through taxes. The question is whether or not it is justified, not whether or not it whether or not it is good. In the point at which it has absolute justification to do whatever you want, I'm pretty sure it's fine to do these things. Let's talk about then the utility and things like that. I think that it was already to some degree implicitly engaged with like the mischaracterization that I pointed out at the beginning of my speech. Just genuinely, the state is very smart in understanding what the state currently needs because it has an overview of society that nobody else has, right? So for example, if I'm the government, I'm able to know that a specific road is not yet to be built. If I'm an individual, I might not know that because I don't live there. I don't have like the ability and knowledge, know-how, as well as the education necessary for me to understand these things. Insofar as that is true, the only way that like this organization, the state is very, very capable of doing these things. Insofar as that is true, the utility is absolutely going to be maximized on our side of the house, simply because the state is able to understand in which case it is better. And lastly, just to further explain the final part of my argument in non-crisis situations, because I also think it's really important. at the point at which you have the maximum amount of people getting a lot of joy and happiness, but these people simultaneously being the most vulnerable parts of our society, as in small businesses that don't have access to roads, as in people that live in retirement homes that need like a comfort individual in order to keep like going and just generally happy lives. I think this is extremely important, and these are the most vulnerable individuals, and their freedoms are currently being limited by the state since they're not able to provide these things. On a comparison, we just limit the freedoms of like a couple of months of 18-year-olds. I'm pretty sure that's justified.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech, both of them, and now to finish this debate, once again, the speaker for side negation, here.
So firstly, let me negate the negations he established. He said that the state is already smart, so they know what they should force their individuals to do and who is suitable, and what are the criteria, and if they can choose exactly what is needed, there's actually no need for civil conscription. And that I can say that the government, in my case, also can know what is needed. Why that does not exclude each other. So if in my case the government also knows what is needed, but they can just pay for the work their workers do, I think that makes civil conscriptions not only unjustified but absolutely not needed. So Prop failed to show that civil conscription is needed, and I could win this debate based just on that. So another thing I wanted to say is that he said that the most vulnerable people in our society need to be taken care of, and I absolutely agree. I just think that people could be paid to take care of these people, also circling back to what I already presented. And now I'll be moving on to my second argument, which talks about individual freedom. First thing I want to talk about is how civil conscription is actually put into action. So, firstly, we have to say that the majority cannot impact the rights of a minority. For example, this would also talks about LGBT referendums and abortion referendums. So, if the workers did not necessarily choose to work, who are other people in a democracy? Who are other people to force them to work? So we circle back. It's just easier to tax everybody more because money is a universal exchange of value. So there's no actual need for civil conscription. The second thing I have to talk about is if they can in fact choose where they will be working. If no, it's not okay because we're limiting their individual freedom, which is absolutely not okay. Firstly, and secondly, if people can choose to work in a place suitable for them, then we get to the yes side of if they can choose their workplace. And it's talking about how the state can provide necessary work for everyone to work where they want to. So if the state can provide suitable and the work everybody wants, there is no actual shortage of people to work, and they can just work normally there. So because there is no shortage, there is no actual need for civil conscription. And if I connect everything in both of my arguments and also the negations, I showed that there is no need for civil conscription and that there are also other ways to contribute to society without civil conscription. So I can win the debate based on the fact that there is no need for civil conscription, which I absolutely have proven. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech and both the speakers for, I think, a very fine debate. Thank you.